What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today I would like to have a bit of a chat about the deck with which Rachael Trimble went and won the Eindhoven Vault Tour. I was very lucky this past weekend. I had the opportunity to sit and commentate. I got to see this deck in action. The final is already up on my YouTube channel. I'll pop a link in the description. Go check it out. But I thought it was worth sitting down and having a good look at the deck. I love doing deck analyses for Keyforge. Because of the nature of the game, I think we've got to wait until we know a deck is good. And I think taking down the first ever Vault Tour totally qualifies. And this is a deck that on paper looks incredibly good. So if we start off with the logo suite, the real headline of this deck, Double Time Traveler. This gives you an advantage. Time Traveler, you get an Ember bonus, and when you play it, you draw 2 cards. You can at any point shuffle it into your deck, or you can just leave it there reaping. It ain't much good for fighting, but it's alright for reaping. But of course, it always comes with the special rare Help from Future Self, and 2 Time Traveler means 2 Help from Future Self. You get an Ember bonus, and you get to grab a Time Traveler from your deck or your discard. So sometimes it's almost worth fighting with Time Traveler or letting it get destroyed, so that you can get it back with Help from Future Self. Because every time you play a Help from Future Self, that's 2 Ember, 2 cards you're rolling. But the other thing that really jumps out about the logo suite here is 2 copies of Wild Wormhole. Because that gives you an Ember bonus and lets you play the top card of your deck. But this is house cheating. Because this allows you to play the top card of your deck no matter what it is. And there are some decks where you play stuff like Gateway to this, which forces you to destroy every creature on the field, which you really don't want to hit. Now, there is a possibility here that Rachael could hit Effervescent Principle. That's about the worst thing she could hit in this deck. It forces each player to discard half of their Ember rounding down. But you know what, ladies and gentlemen? If you think you might hit it, if it's still in your deck, and you can't afford to hit it, don't play Wild Wormhole. Because other than that, ladies and gentlemen, this is a great pair of cards. Speaking of which, Effervescent Principle comes in really, really nicely here. Because Effervescent Principle is one of those emergency stop your opponent forging cards. Effervescent Principle forces each player to lose half their Ember, and then you gain a chain. Well, you know what? You play this to stop your opponent forging a key, and 1 chain means you draw 1 less card for 1 turn, 1 fewer card. That's worth giving up. That is absolutely worth giving up to stop your opponent forging a key. Because the other thing that you must point out about this deck, it's got bait and switch. Now, somebody did some research and found out that roughly 1 in 23,000 Keyforge decks has both Double Time Traveler and Bait and Switch. Bait and Switch is a phenomenal card that rearranges the Ember until either you've got an even amount or your opponent has 1 fewer than you do. Bait and Switch is the ultimate stop your opponent forging card. But Effervescent Principle is not very far behind, ladies and gentlemen. They are a great, great pair of cards, and that is one of the strengths of the deck. Now, we'll talk about shadows and all of the stopping, forging, and stealing in a minute, but just Effervescent Principle and Bait and Switch together, they are a pair of emergency stop your opponent forging. And there are a bunch of decks out there, a lot of decks that don't have any. This deck has 2. Combined with the Double Time Traveler and Double Wormhole, yeah, this is a powerful deck. But it gets better. There's a whole bunch of other cards here. So let's go through, shall we? To finish off looking at logos, we've got 1 copy of Fogify. Gives you an Ember bonus. Your opponent cannot use creatures to fight on their next turn. We've got a copy of Lagwork. Ember bonus, and you get to archive a card. And one of the plays we saw from Rachael in the final was archiving Effervescent Principle so that when your opponent is about to forge, you can guarantee you've got it in your hand. You could incidentally do the same thing with Bait and Switch. Chuck it in your archives, wait till your opponent's about to forge, get it out your archives, guarantee that you've got it next turn. Good work. Twin Bolt Emission gives you an Ember bonus, deal 2 damage to a creature, and 2 damage to a different creature. We've got Quixo the Adventurer, Skirmish, and when you fight, you draw a card. Well, you got Skirmish, so you're definitely going to guarantee to win the fight, or at least survive the fight. And then you get to draw a card. It's not an amazing draw by any stretch of the imagination. It's not up there with Time Traveller, but it's still extra draw. And then one Titan mechanic, if it's on a flank, each key costs -1 Ember. Can be risky with your opponent, but if you're rushing ahead in the game and you're winning, it becomes a very powerful creature. If we have a little bit of a look at the shadows here, we see a whole bunch of stealing. Relentless Whispers deal 2 damage to a creature. If it destroys it, steal an Ember. 2 of those. One copy of Noddy the Thief. It's got elusive, so it's hard to take down. And you steal an Ember. One copy of Urchin. When you play it, you steal an Ember. One copy of Dusk Runner. This creature gains Reap. Steal an Ember. It's not the most stealing I've ever seen from a Shadow Suite. There's a bunch of cards here that don't steal, but there's a bunch of cards that do, and you've got Bait and Switch and Effervescent Principle. Now, you also have a bunch of other really useful cards here. Poison Wave gives you an Ember bonus and deals 2 damage to each creature, yours and your opponent's, but if you don't want to take the damage, you don't have to. And of course, don't forget Relentless Whispers also deals what I like to term cheeky damage. We've got the Sting, Ember bonus, and you skip the forging a key step. But anytime your opponent would forge a key, they still do, but you get the Ember. Nice. And then you can sacrifice it whenever you want. Thing about the Sting is, you have got to be willing to go Shadows to sacrifice it when you've got to. Even if it's not the perfect Shadows turn. Because otherwise, you end up with enough Ember to forge a key, but you're not forging a key, and you're letting your opponent jump out ahead. A risky card, but if played correctly, can be very nice indeed. We have 2 copies of Nexus. It's got elusive, and when you reap, you use an opponent's artifact. Here's the thing, though. Your opponent's artifact might be Nepenthe Seed. Now, there's a whole bunch of uses, but I really like stuff like Nepenthe Seed because you sacrifice it and use it. You could also use something like Mighty Javelin against a Brobnar deck. We did see a few of them this weekend, both Brobnar decks and Mighty Javelin. You sacrifice it for a really good effect. Mighty Javelin deals 4 damage to a creature, and Nepenthe Seed is even better. It gets a card from your discard pile into your hand. This is really good. If you can get rid of their Nepenthe Seed while using it, that gives you an advantage. And then 2 copies of Silvertooth. Silvertooth is not a phenomenal card, but it comes into play ready. Most of the time it comes into play ready, you reap with it, and then maybe you get a second turn of reaping, maybe you don't. Worst case scenario, you've got an Ember out of it. But then you get those turns where there's an Ember Imp in play. So actually, you just play it down and take out an Ember Imp. And that's good enough. And then we see Mars here. I love Mars. Mars is my favourite house. I love that it won a big tournament. Now, Mars does not have the headline cards in this deck that Logos and Shadows do. There are no cards in the Mars suite that really jump out as, oh my god, that's redonk. But there's a lot of good stuff here. There are 3 copies of Exilo Bolter. When you fight or reap, you deal 2 damage to a creature. If it destroys that creature, you purge it. And there's a whole bunch of stuff out there like Ember Imp that you can use to purge. Or you can Poison Wave and then the next turn, Exilo Bolter to purge a bunch of creatures. You don't have any board wipes in this deck. It's one of the weaknesses of the deck. There are no board wipes. You can't get rid of all your opponent's creatures at once. But what you can do is start purging them with this, and that can be just as good. Now, there is a copy of Key Abduction here, which does let you forge a key mid-turn, but in the write-up Rachel did on Facebook, she said she only actually used it once during the tournament. Nice in an emergency, but it doesn't work all that often. We've got Orbital Bombardment, gives you an Ember bonus. Reveal any number of Mars cards from your hand. For each creature revealed, or each card revealed, deal 2 damage to a creature. Works really well with stuff like Relentless Whispers and Poison Wave and Exilo Bolter. You can use this to soften something up to purge it with Mr. Bolter. We've got Psychic Network. Steal 1 Ember for each friendly ready Mars creature. Now, you got a few Mars creatures here. You got 7 in the deck. Sorry, 8 in the deck. No, 7 in the deck. Biometrics backup. So that could be fun. We got Squawker, which lets you ready a Mars creature or stun a non-Mars creature and gives you an Ember bonus, gives you an extra creature, an extra reap, an extra fight. This is good. And Blipip, when you reap, the next Mars creature you play this turn enters play ready. And the combination of those two cards gives you extra actions, extra reaping, whatever it might be. And that can be the difference. One copy of Grabber Jammer, your opponent's keys cost +1 Ember. And when you fight or reap, you capture an Ember. It's good for stopping your opponent forging, which is something you want to be doing all the time, and this deck does pretty well. It's only one Grabber Jammer, and there's no Jammer pack here that we see in a bunch of Mars decks. It's not the best Mars deck I've ever seen for stopping you forging, but it's still a nice little bonus to have. One copy of Phylix the Disintegrator. It's got Elusive, and as an action, your opponent loses 1 Ember for each other friendly Mars creature. If you can get 3 or 4 Mars down, this is great. And it's one of the things I really like about this deck. You've got Phylix and Grabber Jammer, which can actually stop your opponent forging here, in addition to the stuff we see in Mars and Logos. We've then got 1 copy of Tunk, 6 power, 1 armor, and when you play another Mars creature, you heal it. Good for fighting. And Biometrics backup, this creature gains destroyed. You may put this creature into its owner's archives. Initially ruled as your opponent got the say, it was a bad card. And then it was changed to, oh no, the person controlling the creature gets the say, which made it approximately 1 billion times better. This is a good deck. It's not an auto-win deck. It's not a kind of deck where, well, of course she won. She had that deck. No. She played exceptionally well throughout the weekend and earned her win. But it is a very strong deck. And the other thing is, the hype for Horseman, that's basically died down now. People are largely out on the Horseman. If you had a Horseman deck and you wanted to sell it, I hope you did so before now. Time Traveler, on the other hand, looks like the hype for that is just beginning. So ladies and gentlemen, I would very much like to know what you think about this deck, so please do let me know in the comment section. Go nuts, but please do remember the rule. Be nice, would ya? And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and follow me on Twitter at the Wossy, where we talk about games like Keyforge. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wossy Plays.